Texas, both juvenile and adult criminal justice. I'm Mark Levin, Director of the Center for Effective Justice at the Texas Public Policy Foundation and leader of our Right on Crime initiative. And I'm really pleased that we have a very distinguished panel here today. And of course, after each person here speaks, there'll be time for questions from all of you out there. As you know, we've been at this since 2005 in terms of trying to both enhance public safety, control costs to taxpayers, ensure victims of crime get restitution. And there's a lot of success that Texas has had around the nation. This is really becoming, Texas is known now for not just being tough on crime, but also being smart on crime. If you go back to 2007, it was really a turning point. In January of 2007, the Legislative Budget Board said Texas would need to build another 17,000 prison beds, which would have cost $2 billion to build and operate over 5 years if we did not change some of our policies and some of the way in which we spend our criminal justice dollars. And as we stand here today, we of course didn't build those prison beds. We adopted a series of alternatives from drug courts to treatment programs to stronger probation. And we have seen, if you go back from 2005 to 2010, we've seen a decline of 12.8% in our index crime rate in Texas. At the same time, our incarceration rate has dropped 9%. And in fact, we have the lowest crime rate in Texas since 1973. Obviously, any crime is too much. But the progress has also been tremendous on the juvenile side. We're at a much lower rate of juvenile arrests than we've had for many years. And at the same time, we've been able to go from 5,000 youths in 2006 in our Texas Youth Commission lockups to today about 1,700. And again, the key was strengthening community-based juvenile justice programs, which we've done in the budget. And so as we stand here today, we look forward to how do we take the next steps in building on this success. And we have this opportunity through the sunset process. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice is under sunset review, and on the juvenile side through a new combined agency that went into place on December 1st. And some of the priorities that we're going to be looking at as we work with the Sunset Commission as well as policymakers going into next session are continuing to build on this budgetary transformation where we, historically 90% of our corrections budget has gone to prisons, and we're kind of diversifying our portfolio from an investment standpoint. And though also taking a look at our sentencing policies to make sure that we're prioritizing prison space for those who are a danger to public safety. And also continue to strengthen our probation supervision, which varies quite a bit depending on what department you're looking at around the state. We want to have them all using best practices and evidence-based practices. Incentive funding, offering to counties the option to get some of the money that would otherwise be spent on incarcerating some low-level nonviolent offenders in the state, and instead having those counties be able to voluntarily say, we'd like to keep some of that money and use more cost-effective approaches on the local level, and removing barriers to successful reentry, government-imposed barriers for offenders. One of the issues is we really would like to finally be able to pass the bill that gives employers liability relief for negligent hiring suits when they give ex-offenders a second chance. We truly believe after people have done their time, they should be able to punch the clock. So with that, let me introduce our panel here today to talk about these issues. First of all, I am very pleased to welcome Adam Gelb. Mr. Gelb, as many of you know, is head of the Public Safety Performance Project for the Pew Center on the States. And he's been involved in crime control and crime prevention for some 24 years in many capacities, a journalist, a congressional aide, a state government official. He in fact covered crime and drugs at the first part of his career for 4 years at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, was a staffer on the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee in helping to develop the 1994 Crime Act, and has served in many capacities, including on the Georgia Governor's Commission on Sentencing and Sentencing. And he is well known throughout the nation for the data and evidence and research that Pew brings to bear to help state policymakers implement more effective criminal justice policies. Please join me in welcoming Adam Gelb.
Thank you, Mark. So Mark has asked me to help sort of set the stage for the conversation today, so I'm just going to do a quick national overview. We actually have a number of different ways we slice and dice this data and presentation. Hope you'll find this one interesting and compelling. we're going to talk about sort of 5 fallacies, and then what we perceive to be actually the truth. So for 5 common beliefs that are out there that turn out to not hold up. The first one is that the police determine the crime rate. And that is, right, that the police are really the sole instrument of crime control and prevention. That's what I think most people think. I will confess and usually get embarrassed by how many different jobs I've had throughout my career, so Mark, thank you for pointing that out. But certainly in my days as a police reporter, and I think I can say this speaking for other police reporters these days as well. The police at the beginning, the middle, and end of the story. When crime goes up and you get that story on January 1st or January 2nd or January 3rd about what happened in a jurisdiction, whether it's a city or a state, about what happened in crime over the past year, they talk to the police chief. And the police chief is the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story, right? If crime has gone up, the chief blames drugs and gangs and guns, or easy availability of guns. If crime has gone down, the chief says, well, it's because we implemented some programs that dealt with crime and dealt with guns and gangs and drugs, right? That's the beginning of the story. The point that's relevant here is that, of course, police are important. I think the chief deserves to be the lead of the story, but he's certainly not the end of the story. Corrections plays a huge role. If you're interested in public safety, you want to reduce crime in your city or state, you've got to pay attention to what's going on with the state corrections and the local corrections system. The numbers make that rather obvious. Here's the long-term trend in incarceration in this country, which you see exploded starting in the mid-'70s. We now have 2.3 million people in prison or jail around the country, and I hope folks know by now that calculates into a rate of 1% of the adult population being incarcerated, 1 in 100 adults, right? There are 230 million adults in this country, 2.3 million of them are locked up. When you look at the entire criminal justice population, those under parole and probation supervision as well, that number jumps to 1 in 31. A friend of mine who's was the superintendent of the Maryland and then the Delaware State Police likes to put it this way, that the parole and probation officers have fantastic Rolodexes. If you're interested in reducing crime, you know who to look at. The second fallacy, in turn, is that the crime rate drives the incarceration rate. That your state imprisonment rate is going to be high if you have a high crime rate, and low if you have a low crime rate. And since people spend about an average of 2 or so years in prison, the crime rate, basically how many people are coming in, being arrested, convicted of crimes, is going to determine your incarceration rate. And not only research that we've done, but a lot of research over time actually shows that there's very little relationship, frankly, between the crime rate and the incarceration rate. Actually, state policy choices, decisions that state policymakers and legislatures and governor's offices, state agencies, as well as obviously at the local level, are the primary driver of the incarceration rate. Just to offer a couple of quick examples of how and why that's the case. This is just sort of a one-year change in the most recent year for which data was available until a few days ago, so we haven't updated this chart, but this is the change in 08-09, and you see no particular regional pattern. The economy, obviously, between 08 and 09 is in real trouble, but some states, the browner states, are seeing decreases, and some significant in their prison populations, and some significant increases. And when you look at sort of why that's happening, you can really trace that back to policy. Texas showing that small decrease on account of changes that Chairman Madden and others led a couple of years beforehand. Mississippi, dramatic change in 08, dropping from 85% to 25%, the time served requirement for nonviolent offenders in Mississippi, so you see that big drop there. Let's spend a quick second on 2 states in particular, New York and Florida. Just look at what happened there. This started about 10 years ago, 11, 12 years ago now. but the sort of last decade for which all this data is easily available. You had Florida start that decade at about 70,000 inmates and then grow by over 30,000 inmates. So it joined the 100,000 club along with Texas and California in terms of the size of its incarcerated population. New York started about the same, a little over 70,000, and dropped under 60,000. So they started the same, and then a decade later, Florida has 40,000 more people in prison than New York. What do you think happened with the crime rates? Florida went down. New York went down a little more. Obviously, a lot of things going on here. There's this notion, again, that the crime rate and the incarceration rate fluctuate together. There's this immutable sort of axis like this. Not quite that simple. What's going on? So state policy choices in places like your beautiful capital here, Jerry. And I'm sorry, Jerry, there are no complicated charts in here. Everything is simple enough in this presentation for you to understand. Oh, man.
Oh, as he opened himself
up. Next common fallacy that's out there is that prisons are full of low-level nonviolent offenders. That is just not the case. In most places, it actually takes a good bit to get into state prison. You're not finding first-time marijuana possession cases in there. If you find a marijuana possession cases, the chances are that it was somebody who pled down from a huge amount but wouldn't take the mandatory minimum, and they pled it out, so it's just possession, it's not trafficking, or they have a long record for other things. That said, the important point, in all these discussions going around the country is that even if you only have a small slice of your prison population, 5%, 10%, 20%, that is a low-risk nonviolent, that dealing with that population can save big dollars. This is the ratio of prison to probation spending. We have twice as many people on, this is the population, this first chart, twice as many people around the country on probation or parole as in prisons, but the dollars skewed obviously heavily toward prison. That's 88% of correctional spending goes to prison. And we spend on average about $3.50 a day on probation, almost $80 a day just for the DOC budget on prison. So cost ratio is 23 to 1. And when you're looking at that slice of that bottom slice of the state prison population in terms of can we get taxpayers a better return on their investment, there are a lot of opportunities there. A lot of folks have looked at those numbers and say, gee, we could really beef up the supervision. We could have electronic monitoring. We could have really strong drug treatment programs. We could do all kinds of things and bump that up to, say, even $13.42 a day, and really have a win-win situation. Some better supervision and services, and do it still at a fraction of the cost of prison. Fourth fallacy, I'm trying to scoot here, Jerry, so you can
keep going. Right. Only one comment has gotten you in trouble so far.
There's still a notion that the public is not in favor of anything, that basically people want to lock up as many people for as long as possible, the cost be darned. The reality is that polls consistently shown broad public support for alternatives for nonviolent offenders. We'll go through this fairly quickly. Just as one example here, a poll we did last year, it was actually 2 years ago, we just changed years, showed, and let me just read this question here. It does not matter whether a nonviolent offender is in prison for 21, 24, 27 months. What really matters is that the system does a better job of making sure that when an offender does get out, he's less likely to commit another crime. So what we're trying to get out with that question is, do you really care if somebody gets out in June or July, or are you more interested in recidivism reduction? Anybody want to guess what the favorable response to that?
Can I get a
question was? Too many times. So pollsters will tell you that if you get a 30 or 40% strongly agree with something, that's a very strong result. This sort of doubles that with a 91% total agreement with the notion that the length of stay here is sort of not that important relative to the notion that we understand at this point that these people are getting out, and we don't want them to commit crime again. That immediately sort of transitions to the notion that people like, frankly, the Texas model. This notion that with this low-hanging fruit, you can reinvest those prison savings, as we've been talking about, into stronger parole and probation programs. This question specifically asked, are you okay with reducing prison time for low-risk offenders and reinvesting? Also, really strong public support for that, and that support is strong across party lines. This is also part of public opinion. We see business leaders speaking out about this in states around the country. I believe, I don't know if anyone's here from the Texas Association of Business, but real strong support for some, right, and public statements in support from that organization to some of the things that were done in this just past session here in Texas. And then, of course, the Right on Crime movement and initiative that's run here out of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, bringing together conservative voices of some of the most prominent and effective conservative leaders around the country, saying conservatives are known for being tough on crime, and must also be tough on criminal justice spend. We need to make some trade-offs here. The last fallacy is that crime policy is paralyzed by political ideology, that you can't really do good stuff here because the politics of it are just too emotional and paralyzed, and as we've seen, that's not the case. We have states all over the country with Georgia and Missouri and Pennsylvania and Oklahoma and Hawaii working with Pew, working with the Council of State Governments Justice Center this year on comprehensive reform packages. And among other states that have done so in the last couple of years, and really Texas providing probably the best example, and frankly a lot of the momentum that we see around the country is because of what Chairman Madden, Chairman Whitmire, and other leaders in the legislature did here in 2007. People around the country are saying, Texas, right, is the very symbol of tough law and order state, and if that state can change directions, start to deal smarter, more effectively with nonviolent offenders, well, by God, we can as well. I also, just as a quick parting thought, want to say that I could have changed this last fallacy at this point to say that the reason these other states are all, and there's so much interest now in changing directions on corrections, is that budgets are tight, and states just have to cut, and they just have to deal with their budgets, and they're sort of holding their noses and saying, boy, we don't really want to deal with these nonviolent offenders differently, we just want to keep locking them up. But we have to find cuts and somewhere, so this is what we're just going to do. And state after state, we just find that is not the case. And that is certainly not the case in Texas. As you know, in 2005, 2007, when reform started here, the economy was humming along. Even in the 2009 session, if I recall, Mark, Texas was in a fairly good economic position. So in 2007, the issue was not we have to save money. It was how can we do better? How can we get taxpayers a better return? And I think that's still, there's no question that the economy is bringing more and more states to the table and everything, but it's not the meal. I think the meal is that we now know so much better how to deal with these nonviolent offenders in a more cost-effective way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I know everybody always says the man who needs no introduction, and then they go on to give a lengthy introduction. So let me just say that Jerry Madden, Chairman of the House Corrections Committee, it's been a tremendous to be able to work with him over these past years. And I think one thing in Texas people don't know is how often he's invited to speak across the country and to help legislators in other states do some of the same things we've done in Texas. And the other interesting thing I'll just say is, which you may not know, is he went to West Point, was an engineer, sold insurance, And when he was asked by Speaker Craddock to chair the Corrections Committee, I think probably part of him said, what did I do to deserve this? And we're going to be looking for another chair, because it's not something most people go to the legislature. They go there to create jobs and improve education. And this is kind of not something that's on the front page unless there's a crime in your city. But it's something that he has just done tremendous work, and that he approached this like a scholar, delving into the research, delving into the data, and really accomplishing a tremendous amount. So we're all very grateful to him. Please join me in welcoming Jerry Madden.
Thank you, guys. First of all, I'm so glad to see so many of my good colleagues out there, so many of my friends that have been part of what we've done here in Texas to put us on the road where we're at, where we're going, the directions we're actually taking. So it's got to be a great trip that so many of you have helped me with over the years. I've got two of my desk mates around here, desk mate current, Wayne Bohack, and Billy Zettler back there were actually desk mates of mine. And Elizabeth Hayes Jones was here earlier. I know she was. So you can tell who was the best looking of my roommate, my desk mates.
Yeah.
But, I better get on quickly. It may get embarrassing otherwise. As you guys can guess, Adam and I have done this a few times. This is not the first time we've been appearing on a panel together. We've done this nationally to talk about things that make a difference in what can be done in your state. And your state has always been somebody else's. Now this is one about, well, what are we at? Where are we at now in our state? And where can we go? What else can we do? And what are the instruments to do that? Well, the great thing for legislative guys is there's two things that are coming up this next session that you're going to be able to do stuff with. One of those is a budget. In 2007, when we did all the great work that we did, where did we do most of it? We didn't reinvent the wheel. We didn't put a lot of new programs in. We reinforced a bunch of them that we had. But with my good buddy, John Whitmire, in the Senate, we put together some ideas that were mostly budgetary. They were the ideas that said, instead of building 3 new prisons at over $500 million, that we could spend about less than half of that and could in fact implement changes in the system that would keep us from a projection that my friends at LBB had given us that said we're going to need 17,700 prison beds by today, 2012. That was their projection at the time. How many of those did we actually build? Well, we, sneaky little thing, guys, we built a few of them. We call them substance abuse treatment, short-term beds. 9-month, 6-month, 9-month programs. Things that treated people with drug addiction and said when they let them out of prison, if you looked at Adam's slide, and Adam's slide said the public doesn't care whether you keep somebody a year, or you keep them a year and a half, or you keep them 2 years. It's what are they going to be when they walk out the door? Are they going to be different? Because remember, what we have in Texas is a Department of Corrections. What does that indicate we're going to do? We're going to correct behavior. We're going to change people. How do you do that? Do you, if you put them in a cell and slam the door, and 21 months later, or not 11 months later in a state jail, you open the door and let them out, and that's what you've done, how many of you think that they're going to be any better? Raise your hand if you think they're going to be better, because we locked them up. I mean, we may have been safe for 11 months from them, but are they going to be any better? And, the only thing you can really hope for is they got really sick or really old in that period of time, but other than that, you're probably not going to have changed them any. So we looked at that time in the stuff that we did and said, well, what programs change people? How do you change somebody who's a criminal, whose actions are one of two things, either violent or we're mad at them because they did something that is, not up to the social norms that we'd like to have them be at? How do you change their behavior so that when you open the door and let them out, there is a lower probability that they're going to recommit a crime that they did or any violent crime. How do you make that kind of difference? And as I said, there's two places that my legislative friends are going to get the chance to do stuff, again, that says we're going to either continue us on the path of doing that, of keeping us on the path that we set in 2007, which was to treat drug addicts. If you got a drug addiction and we got you in prison, what's going to force you from not attending a drug program? Gee, you're going to get to go, and there's not going to be any choices. We want you to attend the drug addiction program because we want to break your habit. We want to change your behavior to such that we're no longer mad at you or afraid of you. Okay? And if you're an alcoholic, I mean, we found out that we still have, about 5,500 people in Texas prisons that are there for multiple DWIs. How many of you are afraid of a DWI, somebody drunk that's driving on the road? I am. He's a random killer. She's a random killer. Okay? But how many of us are afraid of them if they've been on programs that have broken or at least stopped them from drinking? They're no longer drinking, and they're back doing things in the community like paying taxes, working. Do we think that they're a danger to us? How do you break that habit? Well, we did that with an alcoholic program in the prison. We put it in there. We said there's a new program we're going to put in there to treat alcoholics. And oh, by the way, there's a lot of people in prison with mental health problems. What good do we do if we don't treat their mental disease or mental illness? If we don't do that. And by the way, how much does that cost? It would cost us a lot less if we keep them from coming back. Because we're spending $50 a day on everybody we got locked up. Probation, parole, watching them in the community costs us a lot less. And it costs us a whole lot less if they're not involved in the criminal justice system at all. That's how you break their habit. That's what the public has asked us. They didn't ask us to put them away for 2 years, 2.5 years, or 5 years. They've asked us, basically, to make their community safe and to do what we can so that when they walk back out the door, there's a lower probability that they're going to commit the same crime or any crime. And that's what the public, I think, expects us to do. So you got one place, that's the budget, that you can do that in by continuing to reinforce those programmatic things that change people within our system, whether that be in education, whether that be in drug treatment, whether that be in mental health, mental treatment, whether that be in just a general thought process that they have, because we have programs that we do in the school system that is a mind process change that changes somebody from thinking in a criminal behavior like mode to that of somebody who's thinking in a what you and I would think about and say, well, we're not going to commit that crime because it's harmful to somebody else, it could hurt, whatever the reason we decide not to commit a crime, we want them thinking the same way, not to go do it. You know, stop doing those kinds of things. Don't get yourself in the drug programs or problems that make you want to go out and rob somebody to get your drug money. Just stay off the drugs. How do you do that? How do you keep them from doing that? That's the kind of things that we started with. So the budget is one. The other place is sunset. The great thing about our sunset process, and when Linda's shaking her head out there, she knows how important our sunset process is. There will be a bill this time on looking at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Now, we all know that that is a very open-ended process. There are lots of things that can be done, and there are lots of tentacles that the Texas Department of Criminal Justice has out there. And therefore, this Christmas tree called the Sunset Bill on Texas Department of Criminal Justice, well, we don't want it to be a Christmas tree. We do want it to do those kinds of things that change within our prison system, that look at the things that we have in our system and says we ought to do them smarter. Because I'll tell you what, Texas doesn't do it perfectly. We are the national example. We are the one that every other state looks at and basically says, if Texas can do it, why can't we? I mean, those guys did it. Every one of those other states knows they're smarter than we are. They're less redneck than we are, whatever you want to say. But the reality is Texas did it. And Texas is looked upon as the leader for what we did. Texas is making that difference. But the other place that we did it in 2007 was we did it in the Sunset Bill. And you can direct things that says, guys, go look at what the Texas Department of Corrections does. Is it smart or is it not smart? Are there things that we should be doing within that process that are smarter and more intelligent things to do that would reduce our criminal justice population, that would keep us down on driving that population down? If it's out there, if we have that, okay, this is the opportunity to do that. There are ideas out there that could do that. I mean, we touched the surface this last session, for example. We did things that raised some revenue at TDCJ without raising taxes. There are some questions out there that says, are there some additional revenues that we can provide? But there are things out there that we say, why are we spending this money? This is crazy to do certain things. One of the things we looked at the Wyndham School and did some things, if you guys remember, on Wyndham that said it's crazy to have too many principals in a prison school. And it's crazy to have too many librarians. But it's not crazy to do education of the right kind. And it's not crazy to do the things that change people. And so make sure those programs that are changing people are working, they're working right, and you can make a difference with them. The other thing that we've got going on, guys, that Texas will have is our new juvenile justice program commission that we set up. Guys, I can tell you they've got off to a great start. Chelsea and her committee did a wonderful job at doing basically putting the organization together. They've gotten a new, they've done their selection of their executive director, gone through that well. The system is started. Guys, I can't tell you whether it's going to work right or not yet. I can tell you that I would ask my Sunset friends and my legislative friends to look closely at that and how it's operating, how it's working, because that would be a great idea to do that. There are some great, wonderful helps around this country. Obviously, Adam and the Pew people have been wonderful in doing stuff. I got to congratulate Judge Sharon Feller out here, who's been our leading voice and our director, and was the head of our Justice Centers at the Council of State Governments and the Justice Center work that she's done nationally has been exceptional for all we're doing. And there are others. There are other organizations out there now that are getting involved in this particular mission that we have that says, why is our crime rate dropping and our incarceration rates continue? And Adam pointed out the great slide, the really great slide that says, look at the crime rates, look at the number incarcerated, and states that have spent more money have seen crime rates drop, and states that have spent less money have seen crime rates drop. And why are we doing it? Why don't we do things that are smart? That's the questions that we've been asking ourselves as we go all along with this. Let's do the smart stuff. There are opportunities out there. I will tell you, there's no greater source around than John Whitmar. Talking to him, Lawrence is over there from his staff. They're superb people to work with. But we also have our place in the House to do our side of the mission too, and there's great opportunities for someone and many of you to work on the Corrections Committee. And I know that one of my great members is going to be up next in the work that she's going to continue to do. I look forward to working with you all and seeing you all. And I said, I'm not going away. I'll be around someplace. Thank you, guys.
Well, our next speaker is actually, and then we'll hear from Representative Marquez in just a moment as well. But we also have with us Caprice Cosper, who is the Harris County Criminal Justice Coordinator. Prior to that was a judge and a prosecutor. So she brings both tremendous perspectives, both from the local level as well as the judicial and prosecutorial perspective to this discussion. And she's a graduate of the University of Houston School of Law, and she indeed was a judge for more than 16 years and one of the true innovators almost 2 decades ago, launching one of the first drug courts. So it's a great privilege to welcome Caprice Cosper.
Let me start by saying thank you, Adam. We need a public service announcement on that point of reality that the length of stay is much less important than increasing success and reducing recidivisms. And that runs across party lines. That message needs to be delivered loud and clear across the state. Budget cuts, I think, have provided us with excellent opportunity at both the state and the local levels to re-examine our priorities. and to better align our resources, and probably to be more creative in our approach to problems in criminal justice. And my experience in this regard is that this is very, very difficult, particularly in large jurisdictions, which, as most of you know, are not very nimble at changing direction. And especially when we're talking about behavior change, policy change at local levels, which is what feeds in, of course, to our state policy, our state prison system. My career has been spent, all of it, pretty much in Houston, and I would say that our issues are the same as many of the jurisdictions across Texas, except that there's something different about Houston and San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, El Paso, here in Austin. We're huge, we're big, and that provides us with some, I think, some very big challenges. And so that is one of the things I think we need to understand about change in our justice system, is that we've got a huge volume flowing through the system. And I was amused watching the New Hampshire primary the other night, simply to see that Mitt Romney got 97,532 votes to get the nomination, and in Harris County it takes over 500,000 votes to be elected district court judge. So it's pretty amusing. So my observation first is that we can't ignore the volume of cases that are flowing through our system. In Harris County, we found some relief in 2009 when we had 44,000 felony cases filed, and that was in addition to 81,000 misdemeanor cases filed. The relief we got was in 2011, 36,850 felonies filed. And add that to the additional 6,500 motions to revoke probation, where judges have to decide, do I keep someone on probation? Do I send them on to the penitentiary? And then again, to managing the 18,000 or so felony probationers that Harris County judges manage. And we're talking about a huge caseload. We're talking about 1,972 cases flowing through each of those courts a year. That's an enormous amount of pressure on our courts, our prosecutors, our defense lawyers, our probation departments. And we expect more of the system now than we ever have. We expect judges and lawyers to know about mental health issues and substance abuse issues, where they get very little training, if at all, in law school to deal with those particular issues. I don't know about my colleagues, but I suspect they didn't go home any more than I did, take off my heels, get in my lazy boy chair and pick up the New England Journal of Medicine to read about substance abuse or mental health issues. And so my point is this: if we really want to build on the successes that we've realized over the last 6 years, thank you to Representative Madden and Senator Whitmire in particular, and many others, we've got to figure out that our court systems are overwhelmed right now, that they need help in trying to figure out, I guess, separate the chaff from the wheat, where the resources go. And so we need to not ignore that that is a reality. We've not had a new district court in Harris County, and I'm sure we're no different than other major jurisdictions. We haven't had a new court in 25 years. This applies to probation also. We have made great strides. Again, we know, for instance, that smaller caseloads make a huge difference. We know that the investment of dollars into diversion has reduced technical violations to prison by, right now, our latest count, 14.5% for jurisdictions who receive that diversion funding. And there is research to support how important it is and how critical it is that probation officers are there, and that they are consistently there when we're talking about offender success. A recent study was just done by TCU, which showed that you can increase the likelihood of success on someone on probation by 58% if they have just one probation officer, if it doesn't change. And the reason I'm pointing that out is that we have made great strides in reducing the length of probations. We've made great strides in increasing early discharges from probation. From fiscal year '05 to '11, early discharges on probation has increased 64%. That's huge. That is a huge change. But what people need to understand is this dramatically reduces the budgets of probation departments, since a significant amount of their basic supervision funding comes from offender pay. And so when you early terminate, and I'm not suggesting we don't do this, we need to do this. This is good policy, it's good for them. But when we early terminate greater numbers of low-risk offenders, and that's who gets early terminated, we are left with high needs offenders and a reduced budget. Couple that with the fact that in our probation funding, the insurance costs for probation officers comes off the top of probation funding. We've got a train wreck that's going to happen if we don't reevaluate how we fund our statewide probation. If we keep chipping away, I guess, at operations, and we're left with high needs offenders and we don't do something, we're going to be in some trouble. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk just a minute about education. I think this is a huge thing among all stakeholders, both substantive and process related. You'd be amazed at how little judges know about how we are connected to the prison system. It took me, I'm afraid to tell you, years before I realized that probation funding was part of TDCJ prison funding. And I would say that most of our judiciary, most of our prosecutors, most of our defense lawyers, probation officers are similarly situated. We all need to understand the connection, and we all need to be invested in the success of those parts, or we won't be able to effectuate change. I think I love Arizona's method. Every 2 years, all of their judges with criminal jurisdiction go to one conference and hear the same message. Imagine that. It's probably too big. Texas is probably too big to do that. But of our 6 major jurisdictions, we send close to 50% of TDCJ's population. So I would suggest that maybe some targeted conference amongst the larger jurisdictions, not that we should ignore small jurisdictions, but large jurisdictions have similar issues. They clearly have the biggest impact on our prison population, and they are probably the easiest in some ways to gather all together to explore things that are working, things that we could do better. I know that change is difficult. I would like to say I don't talk on my phone when I drive. I'd like to say
that's not true.
I'd like to say I don't look at my emails when I stop at a red light. I know that I shouldn't. I'd stop if there was a law that said that I had to do that. And we could probably wait until everybody figures this out all on their own, or maybe not. I think education about substance abuse and mental health and criminogenic needs and research in criminology is the same. While judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers hate to be mandated to do anything, I have come to the sad conclusion, I think, that we need a little push. Years ago, judges were told they needed to do training in domestic violence. It made a world of difference. They get little training in substance abuse and mental health, which are drivers in our criminal justice system. I can only help think that more education would be better. On the better utilization of resources, we need to protect the resources that we already have, the ones that we've worked so hard to keep. And we need to quit thinking about, for instance, treatment as a bed. We need to hone the way we look at these resources and how we deploy them. It's not a bed, it's a person. And so we need all the pieces to the puzzle that will support the success and the investment we've made in residential treatment. We need money for drug testing. We need money for small caseloads. We need money for, and I think I said drug testing, but we need all of the pieces for outpatient treatment. We need all the pieces of the puzzle, or we're pouring money down the drain, I think, on our treatment beds. And so I think that's absolutely critical. We've got to address the whole picture of criminal justice. Finally, let me say this from the local perspective that also has a bearing, I think, on the state perspective. Data. Data, data, data is so very important. It drives good decision making. It informs deficiencies in the process. I have found that people want to do the right thing. In the system, they are bogged down by the sheer volume. They are bogged down by the busyness of their lives and the commitment they make to work that is overwhelming. It's not because they don't want to change. It's because they don't know where the problems are. And so I am, to the extent that there's support for data amongst local jurisdictions to understand who we are dealing with every day in our justice system, I think that will better inform the stakeholders, and we need to do, again, a better job of getting the kind of messages out that Adam has shown us. It's great to have them, but they've got to be heard. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks so much. Those were superb points, and one of the interesting things is we know how important teacher quality is in education. There's a million studies, but if you Google probation officer quality, all you get is one hit, which is my PowerPoint. So it is important, and we need to go back and look at the probation funding formulas. As she said, we can correct some of the wrong incentives by changing how we distribute probation funds from the state, which is currently based on how many people you have on probation, and that's it. We actually have a much better approach to allocating juvenile probation funds among various probation departments. So as you said, if you kick off someone who's been paying their fees for probation early, you actually suffer as a probation department financially, even though it's the right correctional thing to do. So in any case, thanks so much, and we're now ready for our final speaker before we open it up here. And we're really grateful to Marissa Marquez, a state legislator from El Paso, who has joined us coming that great distance and on very short notice. As many of you know, Chairman Whitmire was going to be here, as well as Pat Lykos, the DA in Harris County, but they've all had urgent but different matters come up. And we're particularly happy to have Representative Marquez, who has really emerged as a leader on these issues. She holds a degree in finance and business economics from Notre Dame University, and of course Lou Holtz. University of Notre Dame, I'm sorry. Lou Holtz will probably correct us on that tomorrow, our luncheon speaker tomorrow. And she was elected in 2008 to the Texas House of Representatives, District 77, and she represents many important areas, including Fort Bliss, where many of our country's great veterans and soldiers today have been. And so we're really pleased here to welcome Representative Marissa Marquez.
Well, now I feel bad. I thought I was actually invited on purpose. You know, nobody showed up, so that's why I am here.
You were invited on
Okay,
purpose.
thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm just going to sit down and speak to you a little bit so that we can open it fairly quickly to question and answer, which I think is an important part of this conference. It's certainly the reason why I said yes, is that we're constantly learning about new innovative approaches to what we deal with in the correctional system. And I did appreciate that my colleagues here, I want to take one moment to thank Chairman Madden. I know I served my freshman and my sophomore term on corrections, and I asked for it. Both of them. No, but it was truly a blessing in disguise. When I first went in, I was very, very nervous. I had never dealt with this type of system before. I might have had brushes when I was younger, but nothing on the record. But it was really, really a wonderful opportunity and a great experience to work with such a man that has such great institutional knowledge. And I'm glad he's saying that he's going to stay around, because it's important not only to everybody in this room, but to tons of people across the state that do work with offenders before, during, and after they serve time in our system or in our treatment programs. So I just wanted to take that opportunity. You are an inspiration to a young Latina from El Paso and certainly to people across the state. So I want to thank you again for everything that you've done. I want to talk a little bit about, now that you've been thoroughly depressed with all of the budget conversations about cutting, and certainly that is a part of what we do here in the legislature, but also there's a wonderful opportunity that we've seen certain legislators take an interest in correctional issues, and that's policy. And that has been sort of my baby coming in as a freshman, as a woman, and as one of the younger legislators, is to talk about the issues surrounding women offenders and also juveniles. And that doesn't get a lot of press because, you know, even though the focus is primarily on juveniles, is they've offended, there's something that's going on at home, there is that conversation, but not a lot of policies is enforced or looked at with regard to these juveniles, and how can we help them before they graduate into our prison systems. And I had the opportunity to visit TYC and several other organizations that work primarily with juvenile offenders. Our former chairman, Brent McReynolds, had us go on several field trips. I think there were 4 or 5 of them when I was a freshman, and it really was eye-opening to see what these juveniles go through. It's enough that we go through high school, right? You know, those that remember high school, or, right? It's enough to have all those pressures of growing up and dealing with parental units and dealing with siblings and dealing with all the peer pressure that we have as young adults and teenagers. But then on top of that, to be an offender, and then also to be in the system, how scary that must be. And so what I've taken my experience as a legislator is to kind of understand that journey and to understand what these children go through when they're put in this process, when they're ripped from their homes and taken somewhere else in the state to be with a bunch of other children that they don't know, that they haven't grown up with, and how that affects them in their rehabilitation process, or what led to it. Is there a mental health disorder that the family doesn't understand? A lot of issues that we don't talk about necessarily are cultural. I know that one of my colleagues that sits with me on this last session in our committee said, well, we can't be parents. We can't be parents to people that don't know how to be parents. No, I don't think that's necessarily the issue. I think that a lot of parents do want to do the right thing with their children. They just don't have the tools. They may not understand a mental health disorder the way that you and I might understand it here, because we've had the privilege of understanding that through organizations, through great foundations such as the one that Mark heads up. They give us that information. They give us that data, those numbers. Are we to hand parents data and numbers and say, oh, well, look, your child must fall in this category? And how are they to apply that? Now then, when they go into the systems, and I thought the judge brought up a very important point, the courts. Okay, so they offend and they go to the courts. Are we having people in these courts that understand these issues, that they understand the cultural background of the people that they're making decisions for? And it's not necessarily an ethnic issue. It's a socioeconomic background. You know, also demographics. Is this a single parent home? Do the parents speak English? Those are other issues that we need to take into consideration when we're talking about. I remember when I was a freshman up there, I think it was either Vicki Spriggs or Sherry Townsend that just went through gave us an update and talked about the statistics of some of the people that are in our system right now, some of the juveniles. And I met 9 out of those 10. You know, a single parent home. I met the age group. I'm not in the age group anymore. I wasn't then. But you know what I mean, from a border area, you know, where there are not a lot of jobs, where there's you know, the income levels, education levels. And so it was really eye-opening for me to understand that could have been me. She could have been talking about me. I could have been in that system. But I had a great opportunity, and I had wonderful mentors. And are those things in place now for our students? And are those things in place now for our children? And so that's an important discussion that we have to continue to have, not just when they're already in. Let's talk about it before. Are we preparing our courts and our judges? Are we asking the right questions as voters? You know, a lot of the time we go on name ID and it's very exciting, and judges, they run hard races. You know, they run very hard races. And like you said, 500,000 people go out and vote. Wow, that's exciting. But are we equipping them afterwards? Are we making sure that they understand all of these issues to make the best decision for the children that are before them? When they're in the system, do we have leadership that reflects the population that they're serving? Those are some of the questions I asked, very honestly and very forthrightly, to which Chairman says, oh, that's just her voice. That's just her voice. She's not mad. She just, you know. But it was important. I know, he kept it calm. He didn't have to use his gavel too much. But it was something that I wanted to understand, because if I'm thinking, again, as a child, if I'm being put in this situation and I'm supposed to get better, and the leadership looks completely different to me, they're all 40, 50 years older than me, how am I supposed to relate? How am I supposed to trust? Where do I see any kind of mentor in the people that are trying to help me? And so that's important, that we look at the leadership, and do they reflect the population that they're serving? And if not, then what's the incentive? How do we get more people out of the private sector to come into the sector to help these juveniles and to help these women? The other thing too, of course, the policy, and I was lucky enough to get much of that legislation out of my committee with the support, bipartisan support on both sides, was helping them when they're in. One of the major bills that we passed in the 81st session was now allowing nonprofits, religious organizations, to send materials into the prisons, which was not allowed before. This had a statewide impact. What was happening to these kids and what was happening to our offenders? They didn't even know who the president was by the time they got out. They didn't know what was going on in the Middle East. They didn't know what was going on with regard to any other social issues, domestic issues, international issues. How were they to assimilate? I think a lot of people think of the Shawshank Redemption. Have you seen that movie? Yeah, where the man, I don't remember what his name was, but when he gets out and he's just completely confused, cars are bustling by him, and it's just, he's out of his element. And how can we do that? Well, we allow these organizations, they're private, nonprofits, that do this type of work. We're allowing them to be a part of the solution. No longer keeping them separate and waiting till the offender's already out, and then they have to start from ground zero. And I keep looking at, of course, my favorite. But we have to be a part of the solution when they're incarcerated, when they're going through our substance abuse programs. And so I want to be a legislator that's a part of that positive change and that policy. Yes, we can be overwhelmed by budget. Yes, and it's always going to take money. But why aren't we leveraging resources that are already out there with these nonprofits, with the Catholic Church, with other faith-based organizations, right? No matter what the faith. There's tons of ministries across the state that do wonderful work, but unfortunately their hands are tied, and so now we're allowing them to be a part of the process inside. And then also to talk about reassimilation and recidivism, having a very honest and open conversation, looking at the data. That's a very important variable in reducing recidivism. I know that I tried to pass,
Yes,
well, I got a hearing, but it didn't come up for a vote, to look at...
What a shock.
I know. But at least he told me. Was to look at ADSEC and to look at other programs that we have in place. We need to... Change is difficult. Change is very difficult, I understand. And a lot of us times we don't want to be bothered. Well, is it broken? Well, do we really have to touch this? I mean, we have so many other pressing issues. Yes, we do. We do have to talk about this. And so one of those was ADSEC. And I know that there was an article done in the Houston Chronicle about that, is looking at what this does. Are we making them worse when they get into the system? When they get out? Are they worse off than when they got in? Because we have no discretion, or we don't understand who has discretion over who's putting these people into ADSEC. What does that do to somebody mentally? What does that do to them spiritually, emotionally? What does that do to them physically? What is that costing us? Everybody wants to talk in terms of cost. There's a cost. There's a cost to putting somebody in ADSEC and leaving them there for 2 to 3 years and then releasing them. If we're talking about somebody that actually has been in the system and is out, what about somebody that's been kept from any kind of human interaction, from their family, from any kind of spiritual interaction? So those are things that I want to continue to work on in the next session. Those are things that, of course, have budget tied to them, but certainly are important conversations that we need to continue to have, not only here in Austin, but in our communities, and to integrate strong advocates that we have here into that conversation and also get their expertise. And so I thank you for the invitation, even if I was invited as a secondary. Thank you for making that very clear, Mark. But I am very privileged and I am very honored to be up here with these people.
Well,
I'm not sure I want to confuse you with Senator Whitmire.
Oh, okay, yes.
But thanks very much for that. I think most of y'all know, but administrative segregation is solitary confinement. And there's about 8,000 or 8,500. It used to be about 9,500. It's gone down by about 1,000 the last year or two. And TDCJ has taken some good steps, but there's more that can be done. And basically, that's where you're in your cell 23 hours a day with no stimulation. And so it's an issue we do need to look at. And appreciate your work on that. Well, we've got a little time left, so if you have a question, we've got a microphone right there, and she will come find you.
Jerry, I would just like to say that I had the privilege this past fall of doing the commencement address for the Ferguson unit, and then toured the Wyndham School. It was very impressive.
Yes, I wondered if Adam would like to comment on another fallacy that's coming to public attention finally, and that is the fallacy that Texas is tough on crime. The reason Texas has such an incarceration rate that is now equal to that of the Soviet Union and South Africa during apartheid is because we're not tough on crime. If you are a prosecutor, if you are a judge, you are allowed to commit crimes with impunity. A good example that's recently come out is the case of Michael Morton. And the question that needs to be asked is, while that man spent 25 years in prison because of crimes committed by a prosecutor that was more concerned with his own career than he was with the law or with justice, the question is, how many more crimes did that man commit in his 25 years while he was acting in the name of the state? How many other innocent people, lives were ruined, were sent to prison at public expense that will never be known about? Care to comment on that fallacy?
I think I'm tossing that to Jerry. Thank you, Adam. I have no idea. I mean, if there were others, et cetera. One of the things, obviously, we have looked at is exoneration, and they are there. We've had others who've been sent to prison for a long period of time, some of which were exonerated subsequently. I mean, I put a panel together for TSL about a year and a half ago that involved a lady who was raped. She was raped for 23 years, and the police officer who was involved in the whole case with the arresting officer is now a chief of police in one of our cities in Texas. Very interesting things with why it happened, how it occurred, and it's one of those things that it was very hard to call in the system. There are places in some of these cases where it's obviously different. There are others where it's a very difficult situation. I mean, this is a case where the witness said, that's the guy who raped her. And she was a very credible witness and a very individual who had looked through many pictures and said, that's the one. And it wasn't. But she was convinced it was. At the trial, the guy came up to her, the defendant came up to her and said something to the effect, I'm going to get you, you blank. And how many of you, if you were a rape victim, okay, what would that have been conceived of? That was a person threatening you. What it in truth was, and it's very few times that's the truth, but it was, this was the lady that was sending him to prison for the rest of his life for something he did do. Now, he was a criminal, he had some criminal history, but he was not a rapist. And they didn't have at that time DNA capabilities. It was not a fact they couldn't use as a matter of fact. They didn't have it, but they had kept that evidence. And subsequently, he was exonerated. And so it's one of those interesting cases. Was there a crime there? I don't think it was. I think in some of those cases there probably was. I don't think there was no blame on the judge. Nobody, including the defendant, including the man who served, had anything that was negative and said anytime that I heard about the judge or the system. But the system, you know, did it work well enough? No, we sent the wrong guy. You know, and it was a very costly mistake, but it was one that, you know, I would look at any of the ladies out here, and if they came up to me and said, that's the guy who raped me, and were willing to testify before that in a trial, you've got to, in fact, I think, trust the fact that they at least believe that that was the case. So that was the situation they had, and as I said, she was, the police officer said she didn't just come in and point out the first person or pick them out of the lineup. She went through several lineups and several things before that. So Ed, go ahead.
Do you want to add? I just want to see if any other panelists wanted to. Do you, let
Let
me
me clarify the question. The question is, do you think we're going to finally see some law enforcement, see the law enforced on those who act in the name of our state and violate the law, put to ruin people's lives and put them in prison just so they can get another notch on their belt, just so they can...
I'm not one that obviously believes in doing that. So that...
You don't believe in holding prosecutors accountable?
No, I do believe in holding prosecutors. I do not believe letting them have a notch on their belt.
No, he was saying he doesn't believe in letting him have another notch
Notch
on
on
it.
his belt, I don't believe in doing that.
And
I believe crime should be prosecuted.
Who actively participate in sending people off to prison, even if they're innocent.
Well,
just
there's
have a regular-
Let me just point out that one of the things that, if you look at the bar rules, that's one of the ways to hold, because prosecutors have a duty of candor to the tribunal. They do not to hide exculpatory evidence. These are all things that, of course, some of the final
recently we brought out the requirements that they have to disclose things if they know it to the defense. So, you know, that's one of the things I don't think any of us in the legislature want to see someone who is falsely administering the law doing that, and that they should be in fact held responsible. I think that that's the case. And how do we get that done? There might be something that some of my friends in the legislature might want to look at something that says if the local county doesn't do it. Because that's usually where you find it.
We're going to have to move on to another.
I think we got.
Let me just say one other thing, though, that some counties like Tarrant County have an open file policy. That means the criminal defense lawyer can go in and look at the same evidence that the prosecutor has. And we have discovery in civil suits, so why not other counties in Texas could look at the open file policy that Tarrant and many others have. It's been very effective. In general, our system is too adversarial, and sometimes that obscures focusing on the truth, which is what we're all after. Other questions?
Yes, I wanted to come back to the prison. Thank you, Jerry. It's been wonderful working with you. The 1 year I got to work with you, I really appreciate you. We talked before about the long-term health care and the prisoners. I was just wondering if that figure that you gave of what it costs to keep a prisoner per day is the same. Do you figure in the long-term health care people that are...
The $50 does include health care costs.
Okay, but there are some that have been there so long that they could probably be put into a facility, that was private.
Always a question, Barbara, that we have, that we've discussed many times, is what to do with the aged and with the MRIS people. Somebody, just because they reach a certain age, does not mean they should be eligible for release, in my mind. Some of my colleagues at Bills have said, release them at 55 or 60 or 65. And I said, no, because you don't know how long. I mean, they could have committed a crime. They could be a grandfather who assaulted his child, and they did it at 54. Okay, I don't want to release them. So there's a difference there. But yeah, there are people that are in the system that have been there a long time, and we do have a medical release program that's there for certain that are old, aged, and or ill. And it's a matter of moving that a little more quickly is one of the things that we certainly are going to be and need to be looked at, is how do you do that?
Yeah, a nursing facility that is privately owned can probably...
You can't keep them in the criminal justice system and get Medicare to fund it. They have to be in a free system. So we have to release them before you can get any funding for nursing homes or other.
But it could be a condition of parole that they remain on a...
They can't be paroled, I don't think.
Okay.
Scott?
Scott's got a question. He probably doesn't need the microphone. He's got a voice in the
All right. So Texans like to brag, so I understand why we're all still talking about the great things that happened in 2007. But when we look at this year, or last year rather, in 2011, I thought we kind of missed an opportunity by having this huge budget crunch, and we simply didn't address. We didn't double down on those 2007 reforms. We closed the prison, but then the money that was set aside that saved, and I apologize for that, But the money that was saved, they then set aside and said, well, we might need some private prisons. And there wasn't the same kind of renewed.
Well, it wasn't private prisons, we put money aside for going to county jails.
Well, okay, well, for contract.
Contract.
And, but we didn't really reinvest the money either from the savings and from closing one unit. Didn't invest that in programs the way we did in 2007 and expand on that. Why do you think there was resistance
The
to
great
sort of
fight.
taking that next step and what can happen?
I don't know if it was resistance so much, Scott, as the fact is we were fighting the whole time to retain what we'd done. That was the biggest fight that when we started the whole session. I will tell you, we've had several meetings in my offices and in John's and in others saying the real danger here is we've got to at least maintain it because, first of all, when we did the things in 2007, they weren't all implemented immediately. There were time periods. We put in some of the substance abuse treatment beds in 2007 late. We did some in 2008. We did some in the intermediate sanctions in 7 and 8. And so by the time you get to this last legislative session, we didn't yet have the data that indicated how well they were working. We were closer, because that's the biggest thing in the criminal justice system. You get results. You know the results by looking at data, and data is based upon recidivism, which is 3 years, and it's 3 years, as you know, and 3 years after they've gone through that. Well, if they didn't get through the program until 2009 for release, let's say, I don't have 3 years data. I had very little in the way of programmatic things that we had 3-year data. We had to balance a lot of the things on things we could find on what happened in the first year or the first year and a half. The great thing that the guys will have in 2013 is the programmatic beds were put there in 2007 late, in 2008, and the people were put through the programs in late 7, got out, some of them out in 8, some of them out in 9. But you should have enough data now that you're going to have actual recidivism differences, because you're never going to get to 0. These people, not in anything you do with them, you will never reach a 0 recidivism rate. But you've got to see the projective in numbers such that you've made a big difference in the number we have. And that's where the great thing, the only thing we really had before that was number of people coming to prison. We had at least a level that was there. It was the fight in 2011 was to make sure we didn't lose any of those things, at least before we had the data that showed whether they were working or not. And that's what the huge fight was about. And that's why I've got all these gray hairs. I was almost a man. So sorry.
We all remember.
I have one comment. You're absolutely correct. And it's ironic that you bring that up because right now Chairman Madden just whispered in my ear. He says, remember, moving forward with any of your policy or any bills that you implement, data. Always request that these agencies are reporting back to the legislature what's been effective and what hasn't. So what your comments aren't falling on deaf ears. You know, we are trying to make sure that we're looking at all of the variables involved with TDCJ, which is from substance abuse to also the work program that they have in place, and then also their which we call healthcare and staffing and all. There's so many things involved, but you're absolutely correct. We need to keep better tabs on that. We need to make sure that we're receiving the data and that we're asking for it whenever we send out or implement any type of legislation.
And it's real hard for us to double down on something and still you have the results. Double down on the ones that are really working. I will tell you some of the things I put out there we did in 2007. I'm not sure that they're all working to the level that we thought they were. Some of them are, and some of them probably aren't. If you double down on them, what you got to do at that stage is make sure that they're getting the results in the form that they're in, and realize that some of them we may have to go in and do some modification to make them work in the way that we really want them to work, to get the results that we really want to get. And that's the challenge for the guys the next time is to look at these programs and say, that one makes sense, that one's really working well, or do something a little bit different.
That's his formal endorsement for all of my legislation.
Except for one or two that I may have had to help holding committee.
Well, I have time maybe for one more question, dudes.
When you have trouble with some legislators, we don't find out about it till after the fact. But you know, we've got people all over Texas, talk to people all over Texas, so we really want to know who is blocking the system sometimes. who is getting to be a pain in the neck, so we can have some of the local people talk to them and suggest to them they might want to re-examine their issues.
I have a list right here.
But I mean, you know, we've done this before, so just make sure we get the word.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, honestly, I think, you know, it's, what's been so encouraging is kind of the growing consensus around these issues. And, you know, not to say everyone's always going to agree with us, but at the end of the day, I think everyone wants less crime, and we want to spend less money, and we want, you know, victims to get restitution.
And Mark, I gotta say this about my friends in the legislature. They have been wonderful in standing by things that we did in '07. They understood what we did. It was a risk that the legislature took in 2007. Instead of building those prisons, we said these programs are going to work. They have had the courage to stand by that decision in all of the budgetary things that we've done in both 2009 and 2011 to retain those kinds of things in place. And there are a lot of states who didn't do that. There are some wonderful friends of ours, Sharon knows I'm going to talk about Kansas or something like that, where they did some wonderful things that they failed to maintain. And so the important thing is, yeah, we can do more. Oh gosh, yes. I mean, there will be some wonderful ideas that I'm sure will come out of Sunset. I'm sure that there's some wonderful ideas that members of the legislature are going to have and present. The rest have got some great ideas. Okay? Mark was having some things right on crime. People have got ideas, and Anna's worked with them and worked on her own and has recommendations. There are things that, some of which will have major impacts for us. And we can, in fact, then, if we, in fact, reduce the prison population, if we have some results that do that, then there will be funds at least cleared up for the legislature to do something with. But if we're short, you know, billions of dollars again, the legislature may be faced with some tough decisions. And the great part, at least I believe, in the friends that we have in the legislature, the great work that they've done, is that they will continue to realize how important this one segment was that kept our budgets from skyrocketing. An extra $1 billion or $2 billion that we would have had to do on criminal justice if we hadn't done what we did in 2007. We'd be spending a couple of $1 billion more and hundreds of millions in keeping the staff for those places that we would have to be doing that we're not doing now. And that's, you know, that's the good work that we were able, one of my national talks talks about pulling together think tanks from all sides of the issue. It's wonderful to see what Mark and the Right and Crime people are doing nationally. The difference that that's making in so many states is a conservative think tank, conservative organization, saying what's doing the smart thing. And let's continue, guys, to do those smart things in criminal justice. And some of them will cost you some money, and some of them will not. But if you look at that, the savings you can get on the side of fewer prisoners is huge. And that's the major thing that we can do. So there's, you know, I'm going to give my friends in the legislature a great deal of pats on the back. They said that they've had the courage, and I know they will, even in tough budgetary times, that they're going to have the courage next time to retain those things that we show are working.
Well, I think we're about out of time here. I want to thank everyone. Actually, I remember Senator Ogden back in 2007 saying, not quite totally sure about this, but I'm going to take a chance on Whitmire because I trust him on these things. And I know for a fact, people like Senator Ogden, that they're very pleased with how this transition that we've made in Texas has worked out. And so I think that it boils down to seeing the results in terms of lower crime and the data we've talked about. And so I want to thank all of you for being here. And we have an evaluation form. If you could please fill that out. And of course, everyone who's registered for this policy rotation is entitled to be at the Senate debate. You have to be in the chairs there by 6:55. And you can't leave to go to the restroom or anything and get back in. So just FYI. But otherwise, have a great evening. Thanks so much.